I paid off $183,000 of my in-laws' debt, then my wife cheated and told me to pack my things. You know, I never thought my life would turn into a cautionary tale. Looking back, it feels like all the signs were there, flashing like neon lights, but I chose to ignore them. Why? Because I was in love. Or at least I thought I was. They say love makes you blind, but what they don't tell you is that it also makes you deaf, dumb, and sometimes even stupid. When I first met her, my wife, I thought I had hit the jackpot. She was charming, with a smile that could light up a room, and a wit sharp enough to keep me on my toes. She had this way of making me feel like the center of her world, and I fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. I should have known better. Love doesn't pay the bills, or stop people from being selfish, but at the time, none of that mattered. I wanted to be her hero, her provider, her everything, her family. That's another story. From day one, they were, let's say, a handful. Her parents were the kind of people who could talk circles around anyone, always convincing others to see things their way. Her dad, Jack, was a retired salesman who could probably sell sand in the desert, and her mom, Mary, had this uncanny ability to play the victim, complete with quivering lips and well-timed tears. Together, they were a team I never realized was playing me. It all started with a house, their house, to be precise. They lived in this old, creaky place that should have been condemned years ago. The plumbing was shot, the roof leaked, and don't even get me started on the wiring. It was a fire hazard waiting to happen, but Mary had this way of making it sound like a sacred family heirloom. We've lived here for decades, she'd say, her voice trembling just enough to tug at your heartstrings. We raised our children here. It's more than just a house, it's our home. Cue the guilt trip. Every time we visited, I'd hear the same speech, and every time, I'd brush it off. It's not my problem, I'd tell myself, but then came the kicker. They were behind on their mortgage to the tune of $183,000. I remember the day they told me, sitting in their living room, sipping their lukewarm coffee, while Mary dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Jack sighed heavily, like the weight of the world was on his shoulders. We're going to lose the house, he said, his voice cracking for dramatic effect, unless we can find some help. I should have walked out right then and there, but no, I stayed because my wife, my dear sweet wife, looked at me with those big, pleading eyes. We can't let them lose the house, she whispered, her voice soft and full of urgency. It's their home, their legacy. Legacy? What legacy? It was an overpriced money pit. But I didn't say that. Instead, I did what I always did. I caved. Let me see what I can do, I heard myself say, even as a knot formed in my stomach. Let me tell you, coming up with $183,000 isn't easy. I had to cash out investments, take out a loan, and dip into my savings I had planned to use for our future, not to bail out her parents, but I convinced myself it was the right thing to do. After all, they were family now, right? And family helps each other, that's what I told myself. As I handed over the check, watching as Mary cried tears of joy, and Jack slapped me on the back like I'd just won the Super Bowl. You're a good man, Jack said, his voice filled with gratitude. We'll never forget this. Yeah, right. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but I walked away feeling like a hero. But the truth is, a part of me knew I'd made a mistake. Deep down, I could feel it. The nagging doubt, the voice in the back of my head, telling me I'd been played, but I ignored it. I ignored it because I wanted to believe that I was doing something noble, that my sacrifice would mean something. Looking back, I realize now that it wasn't just the money I gave them, it was my trust, my faith, my belief in their sincerity. And what did I get in return? A knife in the back. But I'm getting ahead of myself. At that moment, I thought I was the good guy, the savior, swooping in to rescue the damsel and her family. Little did I know, the real story was just beginning, and it was a story that would test everything. I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and trust. I'll never forget the night it all came crashing down. You know those moments in life, when the air feels thick, and you can sense something's about to go wrong. That was me. Sitting at the dinner table with my wife and her parents. It was supposed to be a regular evening. A celebration of sorts. After everything I'd done to save their house, I thought we'd moved past the drama. That life was finally settling into something close to normal, but no, life had other plans. We were halfway through Mary's famous meatloaf, if you could call it that, when my wife cleared her throat. That sound, that tiny, unassuming sound. I didn't know it then, but it was the drum roll before the fireworks, the prelude to the disaster that would unravel everything. "I have something to say," she announced, placing her fork down with deliberate precision. Her tone was calm. But her eyes, those eyes I'd fallen for, held something else. Guilt, maybe, or was it just a flicker of nervous excitement? I couldn't tell. "Go on," I said, trying to keep my voice light, but my stomach was already doing somersaults. She looked at me for a long moment, then at her parents, nodded slightly, as if giving her permission to speak. That should have been my first clue. They all knew. They were in on it. "I've been seeing someone else," she said, her words slicing through the air like a blade. For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. Surely, she didn't just say what I thought she said. "Excuse me?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She didn't flinch. "I'm in love with someone else," she repeated, her tone firmer this time, and then, as if that wasn't enough, she dropped the bombshell. "You need to pack your things and leave. I've got someone else now, someone better." The room went silent, not the kind of silence that feels peaceful, but the kind that feels heavy, suffocating. Like the world is holding its breath. I looked at her parents, expecting shock or outrage, maybe even a hint of sympathy. But no, they just sat there, smiling. Mary even had the audacity to give a little nod. Like she approved of what her daughter had just said. "Someone better," I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything I'd done, everything I'd sacrificed, this was my reward. This was how they repaid me. "Yes," she said simply, her voice devoid of any emotion. "It's time for us to move on." I glanced at Jack and Mary, hoping, praying, that one of them would step in, say something, anything, to stop this madness. Instead, Jack leaned back in his chair, a smug look on his face. "It's for the best," he said casually. Like we were discussing the weather, and not the destruction of my marriage. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just her decision. This was a family effort. They had planned this, orchestrated it, played me like a fiddle. And now, here they were, sitting in my house. Yes, my house, the one I saved with my hard-earned money. Telling me to leave. For a moment, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but then something inside me snapped. The absurdity of it all, the betrayal, the smug smiles, the complete lack of remorse, it was too much, and so I laughed. I laughed harder than I'd laughed in years. "What's so funny?" my wife demanded, her voice tinged with annoyance. I wiped a tear from my eye, still chuckling. "You," I said, gesturing at the three of them, "all of you. You think you've won. You think you've pulled off the ultimate con, but you forgot something." Their smiles faltered. "What are you talking about?" Jack asked, his voice losing its earlier confidence. "The house," I said simply. "You remember that little $183,000 debt I cleared for you? The one that saved this precious home of yours?" Well, funny thing about that, I had it all documented, legally. This house isn't yours anymore, it's mine. The color drained from Mary's face, Jack's jaw tightened, and my wife, my sweet, treacherous wife, just stared at me. Her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "You're lying," she finally managed to say. But her voice lacked conviction. "Am I?" I shot back, pulling out my phone, "because I have the receipts, the contracts. Everything. You thought you could play me, but guess what? I played you." The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time that night, I felt like I was in control, and let me tell you, it felt damn good. You know what's funny? People always assume betrayal will break you, that it'll leave you on your knees, begging for explanations or second chances, but when it's so blatant, so audacious, it doesn't hurt, not immediately at least. No, the first thing you feel is disbelief, followed by a rush of anger so sharp, it almost feels like clarity. And that's exactly what happened to me. There I was, sitting at the head of the table, in my own house, staring at these three people, who had just tried to turn my life upside down. My wife, the woman I once thought Was my soulmate, had just declared she was leaving me for someone better, her parents, grinning like hyenas. Had the audacity to co-sign her betrayal, treating it like some great family achievement, and me, I was supposed to pack my bags and leave quietly, tail between my legs. It was laughable, really, but let me tell you something about laughter. It's the best weapon in moments like these, so I laughed, not the kind of laugh that comes from joy or humor, but the kind that bubbles up from the sheer absurdity of the situation. It was a deep, belly-aching laugh that left them blinking in confusion. "What's so funny?" my wife asked, her tone sharp, like she couldn't fathom why I wasn't already groveling or crying. I leaned back in my chair, tapping my fingers on the table, as I looked each of them in the eye. "You think you've won, don't you?" I said, my voice calm but laced with steel. "You think you've pulled a rug out from under me, that I'll just walk away quietly, while you and your new boyfriend live happily ever after?" In my house, her parents exchanged nervous glances, their earlier smugness starting to crack. "Now hold on," Jack began. But I cut him off with a wave of my hand. "Save it," I snapped, my voice cold enough to freeze the room. "You had your turn to talk, now it's mine." I stood up slowly, deliberately, letting the silence stretch until it felt suffocating. "You forgot something," I continued, my eyes locking onto my wife's. "Something important." She swallowed hard, her earlier bravado fading. "And what's that?" "The house," I said, savoring the way the color drained from her face. "You see, when I cleared that $183,000 mortgage for your parents, I didn't do it blindly. I'm not an idiot. I had everything documented, signed, sealed, and notarized. As of this moment, this house doesn't belong to you or them, it belongs to me." Mary's fork clattered to her plate, her hand flying to her chest, like she'd just been shot. "That's not possible," she cried, her voice trembling. "Oh, it's possible," I shot back, pulling out my phone. "I have the contracts right here, if you'd like to take a look, or better yet, we can call my lawyer. He'd be happy to explain it to you." The room fell into stunned silence. Jack, who always had something to say, looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. Mary's tears, usually her go-to weapon, hadn't even started yet, as if her brain couldn't process what was happening fast enough. And my wife, she just sat there, staring at me, like she was seeing a ghost. You can't do this," she finally stammered. "This is our home." "No," I corrected her, my voice calm but firm. "This is my home. You and your parents made sure of that, when you signed over the deed in exchange for the money I gave you, so, if anyone's packing their things, it's you." The power shift in that moment was palpable. For months, they had treated me like a doormat, using my generosity and love as weapons against me, but now, the tables had turned. And I wasn't about to let them forget it. "Jack," he finally found his voice, though it was weaker than I'd ever heard it. "We can work something out," he said, his tone cautious. "We're family, after all." "Family," I repeated, letting out another humorless laugh. "You've got some nerve, Jack. Family doesn't lie, cheat, and scheme. Family doesn't treat one of their own like a disposable ATM. You lost the right to call me family, the moment you decided to side with her against me." He had no response to that. And honestly, I didn't expect one. People like Jack and Mary were great at spinning tales and playing the victim. But when faced with the cold, hard truth, they had nothing. I turned to my wife, who was now staring at her plate, as if it held the answers to all her problems. "You wanted me gone, so you could play house with your new boyfriend," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Well, congratulations, you're free to do that, but it won't be here. Pack your things and go. All of you." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. You don't mean that," she whispered. "Oh, I do," I replied, my tone deadly serious. "You, your parents, and all your things, out, tonight. This is my house now, and I don't want you in it." For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a sense of control, of power. They had underestimated me, assumed I was weak, naive, but they were wrong. I wasn't just their victim. I was their reckoning. If there's one thing betrayal teaches you, it's how quickly the balance of power can shift. One minute, they thought they had me cornered, a pawn in their grand scheme. The next, I was holding all the cards. And they didn't even realize it until it was too late. Watching the smugness drain from their faces was like watching a dam break. Slow at first, then unstoppable, they sat there in stunned silence, my wife, her parents, their entire facade crumbling. Mary's earlier sobbing turned into a strange hiccup, her face frozen somewhere between disbelief and panic. Jack's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out, unusual for a man who always had something to say. My wife, though, was the most satisfying to watch. Her usual confidence was gone, replaced by wide eyes and trembling lips. "You're lying," she finally said, though her voice lacked any real conviction. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. As I met her gaze, "Am I asked, letting the question hang in the air. Then, with deliberate calm, I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen a few times. "Do you want to see the contracts, the ones you and your parents signed? When I paid off the mortgage, because I've got them right here." I slid my phone across the table, the documents open and glowing on the screen. None of them reached for it. Mary's eyes darted between the phone and me, her hands wringing together. Like she was trying to squeeze the truth out of the air, Jack finally mustered the courage to pick up the phone. His fingers trembling, as he scrolled through the document. The room was so quiet, I could hear the faint rustle of the paper on the screen as he scrolled. This can't be right," he muttered, though his voice was more a whisper than anything else. "It's right," I said firmly. "Every signature, every clause, it's all there. You didn't think I'd hand over $183,000 without covering my own back, did you? I may have been generous, but I'm not stupid." Jack's face turned ashen. As he slid the phone back across the table, Mary looked at him, her voice trembling, as she asked, "Is it true?" He nodded, his shoulders slumping. "It's true." Her sobs started again, louder this time, but they didn't move me. I had seen those tears too many times to believe they were genuine. My wife, however, was still trying to find a way out. "There has to be something we can do," she said, her voice shaking. "You can't just throw us out." I raised an eyebrow. "Can't I? You were ready to throw me out not 10 minutes ago, remember, telling me to pack my things and leave my own house. The difference is, I'm not playing games. I have every legal right to kick you out. And trust me, I will. But this is our home," Mary wailed, clutching Jack's arm, as if that would somehow change the situation. "No," I said, my voice sharpening, cutting her off. "This stopped being your home the moment you signed it over to me. And don't pretend you didn't know what you were doing. You were more than happy to take my money and smile in my face while planning to stab me in the back." Jack, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. "We can work something out," he said, his tone cautious. "Let's be reasonable about this." "Reasonable," I repeated, letting out another humorless laugh. "You want to talk about reason, after everything you've done, after you sat there smiling, while your daughter told me to leave my own house?" "No, Jack, the time for reason is over." Mary started crying then, big, dramatic sobs, that once might have made me feel guilty. But now, they only made me angrier. "Oh, save it, Mary," I snapped. "Your tears won't change anything. You knew what you were doing from the start. You played your part beautifully, didn't you? Convincing me to save this house, while you plotted to kick me out of it." "Please," she begged, her voice cracking. "We'll make it up to you. Just don't take the house." I shook my head, the weight of their betrayal settling over me, like a heavy cloak. "This isn't about the house anymore," I said, my voice low and steady. "This is about respect, something none of you seem to understand." I turned to my wife. The woman I had once loved so deeply, it hurt. "You wanted me to pack my things and leave," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Fine, I'll leave, but not before you do." Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. You don't mean that," she whispered. "Oh, I do," I replied, my tone deadly serious. Your parents, and all your things, out, tonight. This is my house now, and I don't want you in it." For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a sense of control, of power. They had underestimated me, assumed I was weak, naive, but they were wrong. I wasn't just their victim. I was their reckoning. You'd think kicking people out of your house, especially people you once considered family, would be satisfying, and don't get me wrong, it was, but it was also exhausting, like cleaning up after a party. You never wanted to attend, still, there was no other way, they had pushed me into this corner, and now they had to live with the consequences. The morning after I told them to leave, I woke up to the sound of boxes being shuffled around and hushed voices arguing in the living room. Good, at least they were taking me seriously. I threw on a t-shirt and jeans, grabbed a cup of coffee, and made my way downstairs. When I reached the bottom step, I leaned against the banister and watched the chaos unfold. Mary was frantically stuffing framed photos and knickknacks into a box, her hands trembling. Jack was crouched by the sofa, muttering under his breath, as he tried to fit a pile of books into a bag that was clearly too small, and my wife, well, ex-wife-to-be, was standing by the door, directing the whole operation. Like a drill sergeant, you need to be more careful with that, she snapped at Jack, that's antique. I couldn't help but smirk. The irony of her treating her parents like they were the hired help was not lost on me. Morning, I said, my voice breaking through their frantic chatter. All three of them froze, turning to look at me. Like deer caught in headlights, Mary tried to muster a smile, but it looked more like a grimace. Good morning, she said, her voice shaky. We're just, finishing up. Take your time, I replied, sipping my coffee. But not too much time. I meant what I said. If you're still here by the end of the day, I'm calling the police. Jack straightened up, glaring at me. You don't have to keep rubbing it in, he said, his voice low and bitter. Rubbing it in? I raised an eyebrow. You're lucky I'm giving you the whole day, after what you pulled. I'd be well within my rights to toss you out right now. He opened his mouth to argue, but thought better of it. His shoulders slumping in defeat, Mary sniffled, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater. This is so hard for us, she said, her voice trembling. We've lived here for so long. Don't. I cut her off, my tone sharper than I intended. You don't get to play the victim here, not after everything you've done. She flinched, her tears flowing more freely now. But I didn't care. I had spent too long bending over backwards for these people, and I wasn't about to let their crocodile tears manipulate me again. My wife, however, wasn't giving up so easily. You're being heartless, she said, her voice cold and accusing. We made mistakes, yes, but this is cruel. Cruel, I echoed, my voice calm but deadly serious. You want to talk about cruel? Let's talk about how you smiled in my face while planning to replace me. Let's talk about how you and your parents treated me like an ATM, taking everything I gave, without so much as a thank you. You don't get to lecture me about cruelty. She looked away, her jaw tightening, as if she wanted to argue, but couldn't find the words. Good. Let her sit with the weight of her actions. By midday, the pile of boxes near the door had grown, and the house was eerily quiet. They were avoiding me now, shuffling around like ghosts, as they packed up the remnants of their lives. Occasionally, I'd catch Mary shooting me a pleading look, but I ignored her. I wasn't about to cave. Not this time. As the afternoon dragged on, a moving van pulled up in front of the house. The driver stepped out, looking confused. As he surveyed the scene, Jack went outside to talk to him, and a few moments later, they started loading the boxes into the van. It was a slow process, and I could feel my patience wearing thin, but I kept my cool. This was their mess to clean up, not mine. By evening, the house was finally empty of their belongings. The living room, once cluttered with their furniture and decorations, now felt spacious and clean. It was strange, really, how the absence of their things seemed to lighten the entire atmosphere. As they carried the last box out to the van, I followed them to the front porch. Mary turned to me, her face streaked with tears. We're sorry, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. For everything. I didn't respond. What was there to say? Sorry didn't undo the betrayal, and it certainly didn't erase the pain they had caused. I simply nodded, my expression unreadable. Jack climbed into the van, slamming the door shut. My wife lingered for a moment, her eyes searching mine for some sign of forgiveness. She didn't find it. Goodbye, she said softly, her voice tinged with regret. Goodbye, I replied, my tone flat. I stood on the porch, watching as the van pulled away, taking them and all their lies out of my life, for the first time in months. I felt like I could breathe again. The house, once a symbol of my misplaced trust and sacrifice, was now a reminder of my resilience. I had taken back what was mine, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it from me again. As the sun set, and the quiet of the house wrapped around me, I realized something: I wasn't just free of them. I was free to start over, and that was a feeling worth holding on to. The silence in the house was deafening. Not the eerie, unsettling kind, but the kind that wraps around you like a warm blanket after a long, exhausting day. It was the first time in months, maybe years, that I felt truly alone, and instead of loneliness, I felt peace. No voices arguing in the next room, no passive-aggressive comments from Jack, no hovering Mary, just quiet. I walked through the now empty house, every step echoing in a way that felt oddly satisfying. Each bare corner was a reminder of what I'd endured, and what I'd overcome. The living room, stripped of their clutter, felt bigger, brighter. The kitchen, once a battleground of whispered insults and forced smiles, now seemed inviting. This was my house. Truly mine, and it finally felt like home. But the peace didn't come without its challenges. In the days following their eviction, I found myself replaying everything in my mind: the betrayal, the lies, the audacity of their actions. It all felt like a bad dream I couldn't quite shake. There were moments when the anger bubbled up again, hot and relentless, and I had to remind myself that I had won. They were gone, and I had reclaimed what was mine. Still, the betrayal left scars. I had trusted these people, loved them, even considered them family. My wife, no, my ex-wife-to-be, had been my partner, my confidant, or so I thought. How had I missed the signs? How had I been so blind to their manipulation? The questions haunted me. But I refused to let them define me. This wasn't the end of my story, it was the beginning of a new chapter. One of the first things I did was change the locks. It was symbolic as much as it was practical, turning that key in the shiny new lock felt like closing the door on the past, literally and figuratively. Next, I went through the house, making it my own. I replaced the outdated furniture with sleek, modern pieces that reflected who I was, not who they wanted me to be. The walls that once held their family photos now displayed artwork I had chosen, pieces that brought me joy. Then there were the finances. Cleaning up the mess they left behind was no small task. Despite all the legal precautions I'd taken, entangling myself from their chaos took time and energy, but each bill I paid, each document I signed, felt like another step toward freedom. I was rebuilding, brick by brick, and it felt good. Friends and family began to notice the change in me. "You seem lighter," my sister said, during one of our phone calls. "Happier, I am," I admitted, and it was true. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't carrying the weight of someone else's expectations or deceit. I was living for myself, and it felt incredible. Of course, word got around about what had happened. People love a good scandal, and my story was no exception. I heard the whispers, the speculation, the exaggerated tales of my so-called revenge. Some painted me as the villain, the heartless husband who threw his wife and her parents out on the street. Others saw me as a hero, a man who stood up for himself and took back what was rightfully his. I didn't care what they thought. The only opinion that mattered was mine. Then came the calls, first from Mary, then from Jack. Voicemail after voicemail, each one more desperate than the last. They begged for forgiveness, pleaded for a second chance, even offered to pay me back, something we all knew they couldn't do. I ignored them. I didn't block their numbers right away, though. There was something satisfying about hearing their voices, knowing they were the ones groveling now. But eventually, I grew tired of their apologies and empty promises. I blocked their numbers, cut off all contact, and moved on. As for my ex-wife, she didn't call right away. It wasn't until weeks later that she showed up at my door, flowers in hand, and regret written all over her face. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice trembling. "I was wrong, and I see that now." I leaned against the door frame, arms crossed, and looked her over. She was a shadow of the woman I once knew, no longer confident, self-assured, but broken and unsure. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her, but I couldn't, not after everything she'd done. "You're only here because your plan fell apart." I told her, "You thought you could replace me, but it turns out the grass isn't greener on the other side, is it?" She tried to argue, but I didn't let her. "We're done," I said firmly. "There's no coming back from this." Closing the door on her felt like closing the door on that chapter of my life. It was over, and I was free. In the weeks that followed, I found myself again. I threw myself into work, picked up hobbies I'd abandoned, and reconnected with old friends. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. The house, once a symbol of betrayal, had become my sanctuary, a place where I could breathe, think, and grow. Every now and then, I'd hear updates about my ex-wife and her parents. They were struggling, living in a cramped apartment, and trying to piece their lives back together. I didn't take pleasure in their misery, but I didn't feel bad for them either. They had made their choices, and now they were living with the consequences, just as I was living with mine, only my life was moving forward, not backward. The house, once a battleground of betrayal, had become my sanctuary. I filled it with things that brought me joy. Art, books, music. I hosted dinners with friends, laughed in the very rooms that had once felt suffocating. Slowly, but surely, I rebuilt, not just my home, but my life. One evening, as I stood in the backyard watching the sunset, I thought about everything I'd been through, the lies, the manipulation, the heartbreak. It had all shaped me, taught me lessons I wouldn't trade for anything. I had learned to stand up for myself, to value my worth, to let go of people who didn't deserve me. For the first time in years, I felt truly free, free from their expectations, their demands, their betrayal, free to live life on my terms. And let me tell you, there's nothing sweeter than that. This wasn't the ending I had planned for myself when I said I do, but in a way, it was better. Because it wasn't just an ending, it was a new beginning, and this time, the story was mine to write. I will admit, I thought the story ended when I shut the door on her, on them, but life has a funny way of testing you, of throwing one last curveball, just to see if you've really learned your lesson. I wasn't surprised when my ex-wife showed up again. What surprised me was how little I cared. It was a quiet afternoon. I was sitting in the living room, finally enjoying the space I had reclaimed. The air was fresh, the sunlight streaming through the windows. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the house felt like home. Then came the knock. I glanced toward the door, half expecting a delivery. Instead, through the peephole, I saw her, my ex-wife. She was holding a bouquet of flowers, the same forced smile on her face that she used to wear when trying to get her way. My first instinct was to ignore her, let her knock until she gave up, but then I thought, no, let's end this for good. Opening the door, I leaned against the frame and crossed my arms. "What do you want?" She shuffled her feet, her smile faltering. I just wanted to talk," she said, holding out the flowers like a peace offering. "I've realized I made a mistake." I let out a dry laugh, shaking my head. "A mistake? That's what you're calling it now?" She flinched, but pressed on. "I was wrong about everything. I see that now. I've been miserable without you, and I just want to fix things." The audacity of her words made me laugh again, this time with more amusement than anger. "You want to fix things," I said, gesturing toward the empty street. "Where's your someone better? Shouldn't he be fixing things with you?" Her face crumpled, the cracks in her facade finally showing. "He's gone," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "He wasn't who I thought he was." "Shocker," I replied, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "And now what? You think you can waltz back into my life, into my house, and we'll just pick up where we left off?" She started to speak, but I held up a hand to stop her. "No, you don't get to rewrite history. You made your choice, and now you get to live with it." Her tears came then, and I'll admit, there was a time when they would have broken me, made me question everything, but not anymore. I had learned my worth, and I wasn't about to let her, or anyone else, take that away. "You should go," I said, stepping back into the house. "And don't come back." I closed the door before she could respond, her muffled sobs fading as I walked away. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, nor was it anger, it was peace. A quiet, steady sense of closure that told me I had done the right thing. In the weeks that followed, I heard bits and pieces about her and her parents, through mutual acquaintances. Karma, it seemed, wasn't wasting any time. Her parents had been forced to move into a tiny, rundown apartment, far from the comfort they'd once enjoyed. Their finances were in shambles, their reputation tarnished. Mary, who once held her head high, was now a shadow of herself, and Jack had become bitter and withdrawn. As for my ex-wife, she wasn't faring much better. The man she left me for had drained her emotionally and financially. Before disappearing entirely, she was struggling to make ends meet, and the support she once had from her parents was now non-existent. They were too busy dealing with their own problems to help her. People asked me if I felt vindicated if seeing their downfall gave me satisfaction, and maybe in a way it did, but mostly, it reminded me of why I'd made the choices I had. Their actions had consequences, and now they were living with them, just as I was living with mine, only my life was moving forward. Not backward. The house, once a battleground of betrayal, had become my sanctuary. I filled it with things that brought me joy. Art, books, music. I hosted dinners with friends, laughed in the very rooms that had once felt suffocating. Slowly, but surely, I rebuilt, not just my home, but my life. One evening, as I stood in the backyard watching the sunset, I thought about everything I'd been through, the lies, the manipulation, the heartbreak. It had all shaped me. Taught me lessons I wouldn't trade for anything. I had learned to stand up for myself, to value my worth, to let go of people who didn't deserve me. For the first time in years, I felt truly free from their expectations, their demands, their betrayal, free to live life on my terms, and let me tell you, there's nothing sweeter than that. This wasn't the ending I had planned for myself when I said I do, but in a way, it was better. Because it wasn't just an ending, it was a new beginning, and this time, the story was mine to write.